Hey there, campers. So this edition of the Basic Bitch Liberal Vlog is not at all scripted. I kind of had some thoughts in my head, but this one's going to be pretty spontaneous and thus probably pretty long and rambling. Today is the official release date of new movie Spider-Man Brand New Day, which I'm excited about. I have not seen it yet. I'm going to see it Sunday. But I thought I would make a video kind of, I've been rewatching previous Spider-Man movies. I thought I would make a little video kind of recapping my thoughts on the previous movies, as well as, my general feelings about the character. As I have said from the beginning of this series, I am an expert on nothing. I know a little bit about a fair number of things, but I don't know everything about anything, including superheroes. Although superheroes, I think, are probably, they're one of my strongest sources, or one of my strongest strengths. I don't know, and I certainly have a lot of thoughts and feelings about the Amazing Spidey. I was a DC kid growing up. In the glory days of the 80s and 90s. So I was much more Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. But Spider-Man was always the exception. I think he's the one Marvel character. I think he's the one Marvel character like everybody agrees on, and Batman is the one DC character that everybody agrees on. I don't think anybody who likes superheroes at all probably likes both of those characters. Now, I have a tiny little audience here. I know one person who has definitely been watching this is my older sister Lisa. So hello, Lisa. We are going to designate you officially. You are camper number one from now on. Camper number one, Lisa Miley. That's my sister. So you may remember Lisa. When I was real little, maybe 3 or 4. I think I used to have a Spider-Man costume that I ran around in. There's some, because I remember seeing film footage of me. I have no actual memory of this because I was so young. But I have seen film footage of myself running around being Spider-Man in the park that was out back of my house in Evanston. And this was film footage. This is like what they used to call home movies, but this was like really before VHS camcorders were big at all. So that's how ancient I am. This must have been 1981, 1982. And yeah, I ran around in the red and blue Spider-Man costume. So where am I going with that? And I definitely I was not a regular reader of Spider-Man comics until much later, to my undergrad years, when I finally started reading Marvel as regularly as I read DC, and I read a lot of back issues. So I'm fairly knowledgeable about Spider-Man, even though I'm not as knowledgeable as I might be as some DC characters. But definitely cartoons growing up were big, the animated series. And there was Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, same era, 81, 82, so I'm like 3 or 4, maybe 5, or watching episodes of that and other Spider-Man cartoons. And there was one bit that always struck a chord with me was the origin story. Which most people probably know. He is bitten by the spider, so he gets the superpowers, and he does not use them for good initially. He uses them for his own good, kind of like he tries to become like a professional wrestler, and then when the promoter tries to cheat him, he doesn't care when the promoter gets robbed. He does it, he says, "I'm looking out for number one. I'm not, gonna do anything to stop this criminal who's running around." And then he gets home and he finds out that his beloved uncle who raised him has been killed, and by a burglar. And he's going to get revenge, and he's going to go hunt down the burglar, the murderer, and bring him to justice. And I remember this episode was actually narrated by Spider-Man co-creator Stan Lee, and I remember Stan Lee's narration, which is very good. Whatever else you're going to say about Stan Lee, and there's a lot to be said, I'm not going to get into it. But the narration was very powerful, and when he confronts the murderer and he's that face, and when he recognizes that face, it's the same man that he could have stopped before, and that would have, that guy would have been in jail, and he would have not killed his uncle, and that is when he truly understands that with great power comes great responsibility. So that's what's great about this character, is there's so much, because it's not a simple revenge motivation. There's the revenge and guilt and altruism, and all of that mixed together. So, I mean, I think what's great about the character is, of course, he represents the traditional heroic virtues, compassion and courage and selflessness and so forth, while still being very flawed. He's a guy with anger issues. He's a guy with, enormous quantities of self-pity. Has the girl troubles, has the money troubles, and that's really what his original creators, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, were trying to do with the character, was to not create a godlike superhero, but a relatable and very human superhero. And I think he really is the template for that. And I think he's done. I think he's got a lot of the Superman template in him, and a little bit of the Batman template, but he fleshes it out to make at least a 2-dimensional, if not 3-dimensional character. And I think that that's why we love him, because he is us. But so to get into kind of the live action depictions, well, ignoring the 70s live action TV series, which is terrible, but really into the cartoons. Like I said, I'm pretty conversant in the comics. I've read the original Lee Ditko stuff and the Lee Romita stuff, and then Roy Thomas' stuff, and then getting into more recent days, the J. Michael Straczynski's run is great, and I like Dan Slott, even though I think he's because I think he's written more Spider-Man stories than anybody else. I think he's controversial for a lot of reasons, but I'm not going to really get into the controversies. Or maybe I am, but kind of as we unfold. But so movies. The Sam Raimi movies are, of course, classics. Sam Raimi is a brilliant director. For Evil Dead alone, he's obviously a genius. So my feelings about the Raimi movies are complicated, though. I was not a little kid when they came out. I just graduated undergrad in 2002. So I was a grown man already, and that is, again, I'm infinitely old, old as the stars, but everyone was in love with that Spider-Man in 2002, and this is a real breakthrough. This is a real masterpiece of the genre, as had not been seen, maybe since Donner's Superman in 78 and Burton's Batman in 89. Then you had X-Men. Then you had Bryan Singer's X-Men in 2000, which is okay, but that really sets off the new superhero boom of the 21st century. But I think Spider-Man, everyone agreed, was a terrific adaptation of the traditional story. And then Spider-Man 2. One of those sequels that is generally considered even better than the original, deepens the whole thing, and told the story with a lot of whimsy, but a lot of grandeur, and those first two Raimi Spider-Man movies are considered classics, justifiably. Now I have my beefs with them. I don't like Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker. I just don't. And this is a blasphemous view, I think. But Yeah, I gotta say, so much of these movies is so good. They're so well, they're fairly well written and definitely well directed. The character designs are terrific. You've got J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson, and Rosemary Harris as Aunt May. They're perfect. These supporting roles are perfect. Of course, Willem Dafoe, fantastic Green Goblin. I don't like Toby. Not to say I dislike him personally. I don't know him personally. I've read some things about him personally that I don't think are great. But he's too earnest and also not earnest enough. I think I just find it bland, and Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane is kind of bland too. Peter Parker is supposed to be a nebbishy nerd for sure at first, but he is supposed to kind of grow out of it, and Tobey Maguire is a little too nebbishy for me, and also he doesn't seem that bright to me, because this character is supposed to be really smart. He's supposed to be a scientific genius, and he's also supposed to be witty and funny. I think that's the key thing, and he's not witty or funny. They do not give him great dialogue as Spider-Man. Because he's usually supposed to be, he's the quip machine. He's the original quippy Marvel superhero, who's constantly making jokes and wisecracks, and we don't really get that in these movies. And I to me that's a major part of the appeal, because I like the humor. And I like the sarcasm and all that, and that's missing from this incarnation of the character. I don't want to be too hard on the performance, because it does have some really bright moments. Most of the time, when I think, not that I think that most actors are necessarily brilliant people, but a good actor can play a brilliant person because you can kind of see what they're thinking. With Tobey Maguire, I see nothing behind his eyes. He just doesn't seem like a thinker. He just seems like he's just kind of like he's like this little doughboy. And my good friend Raina, I'm trying to avoid using friends' real names, but I already mentioned my sister. Whatever. One of my best friends and I have talked a lot about how the early 2000s kind of had a lot of male leads who just didn't have the juice. And I've got who some of the other examples were. Maybe Hayden Christensen as Anakin Skywalker. Who's much maligned. A lot of people say it wasn't his fault, and I don't know. There were a lot of leads that just didn't have the juice, particularly in this stretch of time, 2002, 2004. So while I do think the first two Raimi movies are great, they have a weak performance from the two leads. And the love story isn't as good as the love story in the later movies. And Kirsten Dunst's Mary Jane is really not the Mary Jane from the comics. Again, kind of too earnest. She's kind of portrayed as, she's more of a Lana Lang from the Superman series. She's more of she's the girl next door. Almost like a small town character, even though she's supposed to be a New Yorker. And the Mary Jane from the comics is like sophisticated and cosmopolitan, and she's a party girl, and she's really vivacious would be the word. So I think there's so much is great about it. I really can't say enough. These two are justly considered great movies. I mean, action sequences are fantastic. It was the first time we saw a really good superhero versus supervillain fight, I would say, since Superman 2 in the early 80s. Because I think the fights are better than the fights in the X-Men movies for sure. Really set the standard. Spider-Man versus Doc Ock in Spider-Man 2, the bank robbery. Really good stuff, and of course the iconic train sequence, which I think was filmed in Chicago. I could be wrong, but we have the elevated trains just as New York does, and yeah, that was terrific. And you know, the scene where he's unmasked, but all of these New Yorkers come together to say they're going to, you know, they're never going to speak of his identity or whatever it is like, and you know, really lovely stuff in those movies. But I think the lead performances are kind of hollow. There's kind of a hollowness to the center of it that so I consider those to be flawed masterpieces. Is what I would say. Very good, but probably not as great as most people say. That's my thoughts again on the first two Raimi movies. Third Raimi movie, I agree with the original. I think the consensus has kind of changed. People are being kinder to that movie now. The original reception wasn't very good. I agree with the original reception. It's not very good. It's overstuffed in the worst way. The Sandman thing, him being brought in to be Uncle Ben's real killer, it dilutes the original story. Even though I see what they were going with it, introducing kind of themes of forgiveness, but it didn't work for me. You know, there's also like the relationship drama between Peter and MJ gets, you know, kind of uncomfortable, kind of like real relationships do, which is, you know, by the way, why I'm single. I was like the first phase of lovey-doveyness, and then I check out when things get real. And Spider-Man 3 things get real, and I think, but you know what I was going to say about. Just something about love stories in general. Like in the comics, it's considered most fans kind of hate that the marriage between Peter and Mary Jane was erased in the 2000s. You know, erased from continuity, and you know they think that Mary Jane is the true love interest and they should just be together. And the thing is, you know, I get it. I definitely get that point of view, but I also think. It's hard to write a long-term happy relationship in a long-term open-ended serial story, which is you know what superhero comics are. I think, you know, Lois and Clark kind of manage it in the Superman stories, probably because. You know, Lois's career as an investigative journalist can be integrated really well into Superman stories, and they're kind of like Nick and Nora Charles, the famous husband and wife detectives, and they can make that work. But with Spider-Man and Mary Jane, it's like they were always like contriving ways to kind of temporarily break them up and get them back together, you know, because it's hard to create drama in a happy relationship. That's all I'm going to say. And Spider-Man 3 kind of introduces some unpleasant drama that just, it's not very fun to watch for me. I don't know. Like, you can either have them happy or you can have them interesting, and if they're interesting, it's unhappy, and it's kind of... so I don't know. That's just my 2 cents on that. Which is not even, you know, I'm not even taking a position. I'm not even saying that the infamous One More Day story was good. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, it was probably a bad story in a lot of ways, and so I'm not saying that status quo is good. And I've been out of touch for probably the last decade of Spider-Man comics, and I understand that they are not. The soap opera stuff is not well received, and probably shouldn't be. But anyway, that's one of the major flaws of Spider-Man 3 for me. The other is, of course, Venom is completely shoehorned in. And Raimi was clearly trying to do classic 60s Spider-Man. That's what he wanted to do. And then Venom is this element from the 80s that the studio pushed him into doing, of making the big anti-hero 80s and 90s dark and grim. And, you know, Venom is a good villain or a good anti-hero, but does not work in Spider-Man 3, does not belong in Spider-Man 3. A note to the performance of Topher Grace, who plays Venom. plays the alter ego, is kind of like a parallel to Peter Parker, because he's also like kind of this hungry young journalist. But they become bitter rivals. Topher Grace would have made a great Spider-Man. He would have made a great Peter Parker. Much better than Tobey Maguire. He was the star of that '70s show, which I actually think was a pretty decent sitcom as they go. Topher Grace basically does a Michael J. Fox impression. That's kind of what he does. Michael J. Fox would have made a great Spider-Man in the 80s. I think, he probably would have been the best possible Peter Parker, was Michael J. Fox, or maybe John Cusack from the same era. Because they had the witty, funny, self-effacing quality that I think really makes the character likable. Likable as well as relatable. Whenever Topher Grace was on screen, I was like, why aren't you the lead? He should have been the lead. But that's so that is my epitaph to the Raimi films. Later we get the reboot in 2012, directed by Mark Webb, and starring Andrew Garfield as Peter, and Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy as the main love interest. Now, so Amazing Spider-Man 2012, Amazing Spider-Man 2 2014. What I am going to say now, this is going to be a piping hot take. These two movies are great. They're actually great. This is a super hot take because they were so badly received at the time. I think especially too, and because people really loved the Raimi movies. They really loved Maguire for whatever reason, and they didn't want to have it rebooted so soon. It was only 10 years later. I think Garfield's Spider-Man's great. I not only do I think a lot of people will concede that the performances and the romantic chemistry between the two leads was really top notch. It obviously is, but they'll say, but the rest of the movies were kind of bad. No, they weren't. They were great. And this is a really controversial opinion, which I'm going to try to defend. To the extent that I can, but yeah, I think people were just hostile. I think they were just closed off, and kind of blind to the virtues of these films. You had Martin Sheen as Uncle Ben. Terrific performance, even though it's a pretty small part, and the original Uncle Ben in the Raimi movies was good with Cliff Robertson, great actors, but I really love how they kind of, the problem is, when you're doing a kind of a reboot, a remake just 10 years later, but you also want to be faithful to the source material, you kind of have to do a lot of the same beats. I think they did it fairly skillfully. I really do. They changed the circumstances of Uncle Ben's murder a little bit, but I kind of think they, because they didn't want to repeat exactly the same beats. But I think they did it really well, and I think the great iconic line, "With great power comes great responsibility." They kind of paraphrase it in Amazing Spider-Man, but I love that paraphrase. When he just kind of says, your father believed, and that was his brother, Uncle Ben's brother is Peter's father. If you had the ability to do good things for other people, you had a moral obligation to do so, not choice, responsibility. And I love that because that's so against our individualistic American ethos of what's in it for me and I get to make my choices. It's the idea that you have obligations to other people. I really love that. You have duties, and a lot of times even our popular culture likes to get away with that, likes to get away from that, and I think that is kind of a fundamental flaw of the infamous Zack Snyder superhero movies, which I kind of don't like. And it, of the maligned superhero reboots from the 2010s, I think Amazing Spider-Man is the one that deserves to be looked at as kind of an unfairly treated masterpiece, and the Snyder movies are treated that way by their fans, and I don't think they deserve to be. But anyway, I'm gonna get into Snyder stuff later, probably. But the Amazing Spider-Man movies, in another video. But the Amazing Spider-Man movies are in fact amazing. I like them. I love Andrew Garfield as a character. A lot of people were like, "Oh, he's too cool to be Peter Parker. He's riding around on the skateboard and he's funny, all the time, and he's cool, and the girl likes him." And it's like, yeah, but I think people are a little too attached to the idea of the hopeless nerd Peter Parker. Yes, if you go back to the very first 12 issues of Amazing Spider-Man, the original Lee Ditko stuff, yes, Peter is a hopeless nerd. But by the time John Romita replaces Ditko as artist and largely, let's face it, kind of co-writer, Peter becomes there's a more confident, more socially confident version of Peter Parker, and that is the version that has been around for almost 50 years now. The vast majority of Peter Parker's career is he's been a guy with friends and love interests, and he's more of an everyman than a total dork, and I think Andrew Garfield plays that well. Andrew Garfield is definitely the Peter Parker that I am familiar with from comics. Maybe not the high school version, but he's only in high... there's this idea that Spider-Man is, eternally in high school, because that's when he becomes Spider-Man. But, it's really only the first year or so of stories that have him in high school, and then he graduates. So, Andrew Garfield is actually much more in line with the real characterization of Peter from the comics. And I'll die on that hill. And I guess it's a disagreement I've had with people. I've had arguments with people about this. Who prefer the dorkier Peter. And it's I don't know, man. This stuff is supposed to be a fantasy to some degree, and it's if I want to, if I want to experience this hopeless, nebbishy, nerdy loser's life, I'll just live my own life. I kind of enjoy in fiction. I kind of want my heroes to be flawed underdogs, yeah, but also to be kind of cool. So, and Andrew Garfield is super cool, and Emma Stone is amazing. Great. I really have nothing but good things to say about these movies, and I don't know why people hate them. I think with Amazing Spider-Man 2, again, you get the overstuffed accusation because they had a lot of villains and they had a lot of setups for future movies, but that's so standard in the superhero genre. And I don't, I have really no issue with it. I feel like it's overstuffed in a better way than Raimi's Spider-Man 3 was overstuffed to me, because it was well integrated with the drama, and it was just world building. It was really good world building. And Amazing Spider-Man 2 depicts the infamous, the death of Gwen Stacy, and I think that probably turned a lot of people off. But that's the stuff. Gwen is in the comics. Gwen is still very important to Peter's memory. And Gwen's death is secondary only to Uncle Ben's death as a source of pain for Peter. It's so... I think it's really well done in the movie, because we see his mourning period, and we see how he withdraws and he doesn't want to be Spider-Man anymore because he's lost the love of his life. But then he gets back into the game because he knows that's what she would have wanted him to do. And I think it's beautiful. I totally love it. Sally Field as Aunt May. Sally Field has said, I think she's spoken of it as I'm sorry I did that. I don't get the superhero thing. I didn't, really, and I think she's wrong, because she did such great work especially in 2, but both of them. Sally Field, she doesn't do any superhero things in the movie. The original Aunt May in the Raimi films, Green Goblin kidnaps her and Doc Ock kidnaps her. And she gets into the action, whereas Sally Field only does pure family drama in these two movies, and she's so good at it. And there's heartbreaking moments between Sally Field and Andrew Garfield. They're just real acting, just real dramatic acting, where she talks about having raised him and still feeling. I'm gonna cry. Feeling secondary because Peter still cares about the memory of his biological parents, and she's like, but I'm the one who raised you, and you're my boy, and it's like it's really touching. She gives absolutely terrific performance. She has nothing to be ashamed about, and she doesn't have to do any superhero genre stuff. It's just pure drama, and it's really good. So anyway, I think those two movies are fantastic. And I'm going to say those are probably the best Spider-Man movies. I said that they're the best live-action Spider-Man movies. I am almost totally alone in this. I am a voice in the wilderness, but I will die on that hill. Garfield was the best live-action Spider-Man, and these two were the character's best films so far. So that's super confident. And now that people have heard my opinion about that, they probably are going to disregard my opinion of everything else. But I'm going to go on, even though we're already half an hour in. Quick note: I'm not going to talk too much about the Into the Spider-Verse movies, animated films, which of course have Miles Morales instead of Peter Parker. But I think those two movies are gorgeous. The second one ended on a cliffhanger. I think we've been waiting for like 5 years for the third one. There's really nothing but good things to say about them. Like I said, I think the Garfield movies were the best in live action. But Spider-Verse movies definitely give them a run for their money. I was around both for the origin of Miles Morales in the Ultimate Spider-Man comics by Brian Michael Bendis, who I think is still one of the best Spider-Man writers to me. And also the Into the Spider-Verse stuff in the comics, which I think was kind of circa 2016. This is actually a pretty recent intro. That was mostly Dan Slott, I think. Also very good stuff. So really very little to say about those movies, but everything I have to say about them is good about Into the Spider-Verse. Moving on to the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. For me, the first, and I think this is probably a more mainstream opinion, the MCU has definitely floundered in the last several years, since Avengers: Infinity War and Endgame. They've had a couple hits, several misses. The last 6 years have been kind of the wilderness for the MCU. But those first 11 years, 2008 to 2019, from Iron Man through Avengers: Endgame, for me, chef's kiss, magnifique. I think, even though I was a grown-ass man from the start, but I'm still a man-child. I'm still a little boy. The MCU for me, first 11 years, I think genuinely some of the best superhero storytelling anywhere ever. I will have that argument with anyone who disagrees. Certainly, the MCU has a lot of detractors, but there are a lot of people who kind of hate what it has done to to movies in general. It's had some kind of negative effect. Whatever. First 11 years of the MCU, really great. I've probably said that 5 times now, but it's so true. And that is the MCU into which Sony and Disney decided to merge and make Spider-Man a character in the MCU. Starting in Captain America: Civil War, and then going into 3, now 4 solo Spider-Man movies starring Tom Holland. Thumbs up for the most part. I think Tom Holland is great. Tom Holland, again, is he's pretty much doing a Michael J. Fox impression, but he's just that type of guy. I think he's being himself. he is great as Peter. Now, there are a lot of criticisms of the MCU Spider-Man, some of which I think are appropriate. Others, I don't agree with. I'll start with what I don't agree with. He gets a lot of flack for being like Iron Boy, or he's Iron Man Jr. in these movies because he has this mentor-student relationship with Tony Stark. I'm fine with that. I'm totally fine with that because it has precedent in the comics, in the Straczynski comics in the early 2000s. Even though they're closer to the same age in the mainstream Marvel universe, Iron Man definitely does take not the same age, but closer. Tony definitely takes a mentor relationship to Peter at a certain point and does upgrades to his suit and everything. So, preceding the original Civil War in the comics. And, that was great. I think it's totally great that he interacts with other superheroes in the MCU movies, with Doctor Strange and with Nick Fury. I'm all for it. I'm all for his integration into the MCU. I mean, that's the whole point, is that he is now part of the shared universe. And that's what comics are like. Superheroes are always crossing over and interacting with each other. And I have no time for that criticism. Now, other criticisms. The role of Uncle Ben, I was going to say, not only diminished, it's eliminated entirely in the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies. And he is not... With the first movie, Homecoming, there's a bit of an... Is my lighting completely... I don't know what happened. I don't know, did the sun go away? Whatever. Nobody's watching this point. Who cares? Uncle Ben is... maybe alluded to in the first movie, where he says something, where Peter says something to his friend Ned, after everything that Aunt May has been through, with the implication that he's talking about Uncle Ben, but it's never explicitly stated. And that changes the character completely. I think in Civil War he says something to the effect of his motivation is, if you can stop bad things from happening, and then the bad things happen anyway, it's your fault that they happen, which is kind of an allusion to his original motivation and his origin. But the third movie, Spider-Man No Way Home, kills off Aunt May, spoilers, and she is the one to kind of give Peter that responsibility mantra, and she kind of takes, she becomes Uncle Ben and Aunt May in one. And I don't know how I feel about that. It's okay for this universe, I guess. It's an alternate universe. It's whatever. I guess I'm ultimately, I'm not gonna bitch about it. But it does feel like a loss. And along with that, there's another criticism of, Peter's working class roots. The fact that Peter is not rich, he is poor, he is someone who has to struggle. That element is maybe a little bit diminished in the Holland movies. The first movie definitely has some allusions to it, and I think it's done pretty well. Where you have Michael Keaton's Vulture as the bad guy, but he was like an honest working class guy in the beginning of the movie who realizes how stacked the system is against him, and it's actually Tony Stark who kind of screws him out of a legitimate job, and he has a legitimate grievance, and I actually think he's a great sympathetic villain. And Michael Keaton is he's a genius. The class aspect is still there at least in Spider-Man Homecoming, and you've got this, and you've got Peter kind of aspiring to be an Avenger, kind of aspiring to be like Tony, be like Iron Man, who is a billionaire, of course, and that doesn't necessarily sit right with some people, but on the other hand, I really do think that wanting to be rich is definitional to being working class. We all want to be rich, and so I don't overall I don't hate I don't love it or hate it, but I get it, but I will say that and I just rewatched Homecoming last night, and something that I've always felt about it is you get kind of the classic Peter Parker Spider-Man dilemmas where he has to choose between his social life and his responsibilities to be a hero. And where Peter has to he's constantly ducking out on the girl he likes, and not going to parties and blah blah because he has to go off and be Spider-Man. And that dilemma is great. That stuff is great because it shows that he ultimately has to be selfless, even though he's gonna whine about it because he's a self-pitying character, which is great. That contrast and that conflict is great. In this movie, it changes a little bit and it diminishes a little bit because his motivation is not just to do the right thing and to help people who are in need of being helped. His motivation is to become an Avenger, to basically get the big promotion, to get it's his career, it's his professional aspiration. So the conflict between if we're to analogize this to real life, the conflict between your personal life and your social life and your career is different from the conflict between your social life and altruism and wanting to do the right thing and being compassionate. That's a more elevated kind of conflict. The conflict between my personal satisfaction and between my responsibility and doing the right thing. That's a very different thing from my personal satisfaction and my resume. And, being a striver. That conflict is, on the one hand, it's more relatable. More of us do in real life. We do have to choose between our love life or our friends versus our career. But it definitely makes it less noble. Because the conflict isn't, I've got to put the world before me. It's I've got to put different parts of me above other parts of me. And that's just, it makes it all a little more relatable, yes, but also kind of more pedestrian. A lot of people sacrifice things for their job. But it's not the same thing as sacrificing for the world. Does any of this make sense? I don't know. Again, we're babbling. But Homecoming overall, great movie. Then there's Far From Home, which I think gets knocked a lot. I think that's the general consensus. I like it. I think it's a very fun movie. I think it's the one that really develops the romance between Peter and MJ, played by Zendaya, and of course Tom Holland and Zendaya are married in real life, and they're super cute together. And they're also, it's not quite as good as Garfield and Stone, but Holland and Zendaya are great. And their first kiss really looks like high school kids kissing. Which is great. It's very innocent, tentative, and cute, and they really are teenagers. So that's great. There are things I don't like about it, like Nick Fury suddenly turning into a Skrull, which is something that connects to the larger Marvel universe, and then that was the awful Secret Invasion series. Blah blah blah. That's kind of bait and switch. That that's really the worst kind of. This is just a tie-in for the sake of tying in. It's not something that's serving this story or this character. But that's a minor complaint. Overall, I think it's a really good movie. It's a movie that and on the better side of being integrated into a larger universe, it's the one movie that really deals with the whole half of humanity disappeared for 5 years. And how crazy that would be. It deals with it in a very lighthearted kind of way, but at least it deals with it, and like almost none of the other post Endgame media has dealt with it. And then there's No Way Home, which I think a lot of people would see as, it's kind of a cash grab, and it did make quite a lot of money. But bringing Maguire and Garfield and Holland together, I think is really great, because in my opinion, No Way Home is great. It doesn't sacrifice the fact that it's still basically Tom Holland's story, and it's still basically an MCU film, and it advances his characterization and his relationships with MJ and Ned and Aunt May, and it doesn't sacrifice any of that for the crossover, in my opinion. It's ultimately a great crossover film, and this is probably my longest video ever now. I think that's probably an appropriate place to end. I don't know. Quick recap. Raimi films, great but flawed. Garfield films, actually really great and incredibly underrated. Give them another try if you haven't. Into the Spider-Verse, nothing but good things. MCU, mostly really good. And I'm looking forward to Brand New Day being really good, and I hope you have a really good Brand New Day whenever you're watching this. I'm recording it at noon. The day is not quite brand new, but it's newish enough that I'm still optimistic. All right, I talk way too much. Good night. What?